So we'll just wait maybe one more minute to let everyone get on, and then we'll get started. So if you're just joining us, thank you for having us. Thank you for being here. If you want to, as you're thinking about it, if you already have some burning questions that you have for the stream team, go ahead and put them. You can either put it in the Q&A box or the chat box. And then we'll get started in just 1 minute as people come on. Okay, just because we're pressed for time, I'm going to go ahead and get started because I just think there are a lot of questions and a lot of things that we have to ask this amazing team today. So welcome everybody who is joining us tonight or who is watching us at a later time. I feel like I'm in the presence of royalty right now as you are being joined by what I like to call the dream team of research and clinical work for Angelman syndrome, predominantly located at UNC. We're going to give everyone a chance to introduce themselves, but I first and foremost want to say a big thank you from our community. I won't get too cheesy on you all, but as a parent, I am incredibly thankful for the collective amount of years and work and blood and sweat and tears that you guys have all put out there to find supports for our families, find treatments, find cures, find clinical work, get research data, all that stuff that is incredibly important for this process in order to get to that ending goal of trying to find a meaningful therapeutic treatment for our families. So I just can't thank you all enough for what you've done. No one wants to hear from me, so I'm gonna go ahead and just what we're gonna do is we're gonna get started. We're gonna have each one of these amazing individuals introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what they do, and maybe what they're working on. I know that's a lot because some of you probably are working on a lot, but I think it's important for everyone to understand the scope of work that is happening at UNC because it's kind of like the perfect circle of the spectrum of data, research, clinical work, and all that fun stuff all put together. So I'm going to start just by what I see, and I'm not just going with Ben first, just because I have so much admiration for Dr. Philpot and all that he has done, but you are my first to my left. So I'm going to go with you first, Ben.
Sure. So hi, I'm Ben Philpot. I'm the Associate Director of the UNC Neuroscience Center and a professor in the Department of Cell Biology and Physiology, University of North Carolina. And I've dedicated about the last 15 years of my life or so to studying Angelman syndrome and trying to develop therapeutics for Angelman syndrome.
So we'll get back to you on what you're actually working on right now. So hang tight because there's probably a lot. We'll move over to Jamie. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you. So I'm Jamie Kappel. I'm Associate Professor of Pediatrics and Neurology, and I'm sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum from Ben. And I was recruited to come to UNC in 2020 to actually lead the clinical trials that everyone has been hearing so much about, and the first in human gene therapy type trials for Angelman syndrome. And I'm really excited to be part of this panel and to be involved with this group. This is just a wonderful place to be and a wonderful group to work with.
I'm sure that all of our families listening will have 9 million questions for you, Jamie, because when you mentioned the word clinical trial, so I know people are really excited to hear more about that. So, okay, so Mark, let's go to you.
Sure. Hi, my name is Mark Zylka. I'm the director of the Neuroscience Center at UNC. I'm also a professor in the Cell Biology and Physiology department. My work has been focused most recently on using this technology called CRISPR-Cas. It's a genome editor to try and come up with new treatments for Angelman syndrome. Our research primarily involves work with mice and working very closely with Ben, and looking forward to talking more with all of you.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. And Mark, I don't know if you remember, one of my first board meetings is when you came to do I think it was like an actual presentation of what you're working on when we were at UNC. And I got to tour the lab. And Dr. Philpot, I don't know if I met you at that time, but I remember listening to what Mark was saying, and most of the families will sympathize with me on this, but it was kind of like glass eyes. Like I didn't understand one word that was coming out of his mouth, but I was like, this sounds unbelievable. And I'm super excited to learn more. So Mark, we're so thankful for all you've done.
It reminds me of when when I was in graduate school, I would be very proud and send my papers to my parents, and they would say, "This looks great. I could understand the first 2 words." And after that, we're so proud for you.
It's so true. It's so true. That's why I'm so glad I have people like you guys. Whenever people are talking, I'll make notes. And then afterwards, I'll call and be like, Liz, what the heck does this, and this mean? So I'm very thankful for that. So thank you for being here, Mark. And Liz, we'll move on to you.
Oh, let me find unmute. All right. Hi, guys. Most of you probably know me. I'm Liz Jalazzo. I wear lots of hats in this community, most importantly as a parent, a fellow parent in this community. My 7-year-old daughter, as you all know, Evelyn, has Angelman Syndrome. But I'm also on the UNC Angelman team. So I'm a clinical geneticist in the Division of Pediatric Genetics and Metabolism. And I see kiddos and adults across the lifespan with Angelman syndrome through our multidisciplinary Angelman clinic. I think maybe perhaps to Amanda, an equally important role is, I think I'm her Angelman translator, as she said. So I am the interpreter of all those genetic reports that you send across. So anytime somebody has questions about their genetic reports and what those mean, they usually wind up with me. So feel free to fire away any of those kind of questions as well tonight. And then, of course, I'm the Chief Medical Officer for the Angelman Syndrome Foundation and the Medical Director for the Bladder Learning Network.
Not that she doesn't have enough titles, right? I know, right? We'll just keep adding on the work for her. No pressure, right?
It's all fun.
She's also on call tonight. So if you see her step away, that is why.
That's why, yep.
Okay, Ann Wheeler.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ann, and I'm a little bit of a UNC imposter at the moment. I don't actually work at UNC, except for with Angelman. So I want to give the Angelman community, that's my continuous tie to UNC. And I did work at the Carolina Institute for Developmental Disabilities at UNC for about 8 years, and then have not any more recently, about 9 years ago, moved over to RTI International, where I do lots of work with Angelman syndrome. So I currently direct the Ladder database project. And I do work in newborn screening, so looking at ways that we can reduce age of diagnosis for individuals with Angelman syndrome. And I still work with the clinic, so I do work very closely with Margaret Deramus to see families who come to UNC to see. I'm the psychologist on the clinic and support families with behavior, developmental questions, that kind of thing.
Awesome, Ann, thank you for being here. I invite Ann to everything, just to remind everybody the importance of registering and enrolling with Ladder. So I'll, as someone else is talking, I'll make sure to put the link into Ladder. If you have not registered and enrolled in Ladder, we want to make sure that you do that. So Mark, welcome to, this is the first time I think that I've had you on a webinar, so I'm so excited to have you. Love for you to introduce yourself to the community.
Yeah, I'm really excited too. I'm Mark Shen. I'm an assistant professor here at UNC, and my lab's research focuses on working with really young children with Angelman syndrome and trying to understand their brain development. So we use MRI and we do longitudinal studies to track the brain development of children with Angelman syndrome from really early ages, from infancy and toddlerhood through school age period and even into adulthood. And I'm very lucky because not only do I get a chance to work with all of these eminent clinicians and scientists, but I also get to see families of kids with autism through our work, through our clinical research. And so thrilled to be here and happy to answer any questions.
Awesome, thank you so much. We're so excited about the work that you're doing, and it's such important work, which we'll talk about in a minute. And last but certainly not least, Margaret, would you like to introduce yourself to the community?
Sure, I'm Margaret Deramus. I'm a speech language pathologist first. and I'm also the coordinator of the clinic at UNC. I also coordinate the natural history study at UNC, the site UNC. What I find is just amazing about all of these folks here at UNC is really what Amanda said about us being a translational research model from Ben and Mark's labs to the clinic. And we have trainees that work in the labs at the cellular model, at the mouse model, who come in and they are able to be in the clinic with us and, hands-on, and vice versa. The CIDD is the Carolina Institute for Developmental Disabilities. It's a IDDRC, so it's one of the research centers for IDD across the state. We're also a UCED, which is the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. And we're also a LEND, so that's Leadership, Education, and Neurodevelopmental Disabilities. So we have trainees who come through our center, and they're getting trained in all sorts of different developmental disabilities, but those who participate in the Angelman Clinic get to experience Angelman, and then they're going out there, and they can also go into the labs and visit the labs, and then they're going out there and they're having, living their expertise, and they can connect back with us. But it's just a really great model that we have.
Well, what I love about it too is the UNC clinic is probably one of the oldest clinics in our network at the foundation as well. So there's been a lot of history with that clinic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is super exciting.
Nope.
So before I get into the questions, I've been getting a lot of texts because apparently we told everyone that this was going to be on Facebook. So that's where everyone's at right now, waiting for this. So I'm going to go really quickly and try to get us on Facebook. So if you guys can just give me one moment. And as I'm doing that, I'm going to go ahead and as I'm doing that, maybe give a little bit of a brief commercial about the work that you're doing with Ladder, and why that's important to the research and to this team.
Absolutely. All right. So yeah, if you haven't heard about Ladder, what it stands for is Linking Angelman and Dup15 Data for Expanded Research. And the whole idea behind Ladder is to help us maximize the information that you provide whenever you go to a clinic, whenever you participate in a research study, into one centralized place, so that if one of these researchers has a specific question about Angelman, or if there is a industry partner, a pharmacy company who wants to think about what are the most important things to families, for example, about for the next stage of development, what's the most important thing that we can target, they can come to us and they can say, what's in Ladder database? What have people been giving to Ladder about this question? And then they can have that information, and it can help us develop treatments. It can help us move the field faster along. The other thing that we're hoping it can do, because we're also Ladder, if you enroll in Ladder and then you go to a clinic, any information you give the clinicians will be kept in the Ladder database. And then whatever treatments seem to be working, we can also put in the Ladder database, which can then hopefully inform clinicians across the network of clinics that serve patients with Angelman about the things that have been most helpful for other families. So we're really hoping that this is a feedback loop that helps everybody along the way. And it's super simple. All you need to do is go in. I've got the website right here.
Yes, good job.
.org. It's on my name. You can just go in and enroll, sign up. And then once you've signed up and give consent to have those data sets linked, if you've done any of these programs, we can pull your data into one centralized place. So happy to answer questions about that.
It's an amazing project, and something that was super important to the foundation to be able to take all this data that is being collected within our clinics, and which is very important data to both help us understand how we can treat symptomatically Angelman syndrome, but also how we can give data out to help push these treatments as we move forward. So those of you that are now joining us on Facebook, which There's a lot of people now. I'm going to try to manage both through my phone through here. Feel free to put any questions that you have in the comment section. If you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching through Zoom, you can put it through the Q&A. We have our amazing team with us. So if you've already missed the introductions, no worries. This is being recorded. We'll get this back out. But Ben, I'm going to turn to you. A lot of the questions that we had families ask is just to maybe if you could give a little bit of an overview of what you're working on when it comes to Angelman syndrome, especially when it comes to treatments.
So we're really working on two main treatment modalities in my lab. One is a gene therapy and the other is a small molecule therapy. So the gene therapy is where we use a viral vector, basically a vehicle to deliver the UBE3A gene back to the brain of individuals with Angelman syndrome. And we have a unique strategy in that we've found a way to package two of the three isoforms of UBE3A into a single viral vector. So there are basically several different protein products that are made for UBE3A. And the two main ones that are expressed in the human brain, we're able to package and deliver as a genetic therapy for Angelman syndrome. So that's one of the things we're working on. The other is a small molecule treatment. And the small molecule treatment builds actually upon a discovery made a long time ago, where we found that a drug called topotecan can unsilence the dormant allele of UBE3A, the paternal allele of UBE3A. But unfortunately, that original finding of the compound topotecan was associated with a number of toxicities, and it had difficulty crossing into the brain. But we continued the search to try to identify new compounds, and we've now found new compounds that are capable of crossing the blood-brain barrier and can produce widespread unsilencing of paternal UBE3A throughout the brain. So it's something that we're really excited about and that we're pursuing very actively. So in parallel, we're studying these two strategies, one the gene therapy and one the small molecule therapy, and trying to move those both forward. At the same time, having that build upon basic foundational research that's really important for the advancement of any of these trials, such as understanding where and when UBE3A is expressed in the brain, including studying that in a primate model that mimics the human brain.
So I'm going to ask the questions that some of our families may be thinking, and don't be embarrassed if you are, because I'm thinking them as well. So help me understand what a viral vector is. Is it literally like a pill?
So the viral vector is really, you're kind of taking a viral-like particle, you're taking out all the bad things of the virus that would make one sick, and then you're packaging it with DNA, which is the DNA that you want to deliver. So you've taken the bad things out so that you can deliver it safely, and you really just are packaging your gene of interest. So this would be something that would likely be injected, and then the viral-like particle would go to the brain and produce UBE3A in the areas of the brain that you're targeting.
So is this, I mean, in theory, is this something that would only need to be given once, or is it something that would have to be given, continuously?
Yeah, so that's, theoretically, it would be a one-time treatment that you would deliver the gene therapy and you produce lifelong UBE3A expression off that virally delivered UBE3A. So that's the advantage of that approach, is that if it works, it would not necessitate like frequent deliveries, including those that might be more invasive. The disadvantage is you need to be particularly cautious in using this approach, because if you're producing adverse consequences, then those too would presumably be lifelong. Yeah. So it's something that really necessitates doing due diligence up front and making sure that you've done all the possible safety studies that you can before proceeding with this. And this is something that we're heavily invested in and that we're really excited about doing.
So I don't know if you can answer this, but I'll ask it. Like, as far as both of those kind of processes, where do you see yourself in the timeline of where those processes are at to get to preclinical?
Yeah, I mean, we're in preclinical stages, and I guess the question is when we feel comfortable taking it to the clinic.
Yes.
And it's a question I always hate to answer, because it could be a short timeline or it could be never. So there's a lot of time in between that. basically, I'd say we're working very hard, we're working very diligently, and the goal is to try to get it in the not so distant future to get something to clinic. But with that said, we really are conservative and want to make sure that we have done all the possible due diligence we can for safety and efficacy. So for that, I'm gonna hem and haw and give a evasive answer.
I think it's so important for our families to hear, because as much as we as parents are super excited about the possibility of treatments, that these are kind of transformational possible gene therapy treatments. And so then knowing that researchers are really taking their time and understanding and working through the safety of it all, it's very important for us to understand and know that this takes time. But because it takes time, there's some reassurance that there's a lot of safety protocols going on before that happens. So we appreciate that for sure.
And I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic because the research is going extremely well. And all the indications are really positive with the research. But like I said, we like to be cautious and not promise more than we can deliver, but we're working very actively and moving things forward as fast as we can. It seems to be going well.
Yeah, before I move to Mark and ask Mark about what he's working on, I'm curious, Ben, from your perspective, why do you think Angelman is such like a hot spot right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think many people have hit upon the idea that really, if we can't develop a therapeutic for Angelman syndrome, then it's going to be really hard to develop therapeutics for other neurological disorders, because there are a lot of advantages for Angelman syndrome. And the first advantage is that we know the gene that we're targeting, UB3A, and it's a single gene. Even though there can be larger deletions, UB3A really is the driving gene for the disorder. And this is a huge advantage over other disorders like schizophrenia, where there are multiple genes involved and it's quite complex. So we have a single target. The other is that there's no apparent neurodegeneration in Angelman syndrome. So this is a huge advantage. It's very difficult to overcome neurodegeneration. So in the case of Alzheimer's, late Alzheimer's, there's a lot of neurodegeneration in the brain that's very difficult to overcome. And then the third reason is that we have this huge advantage of having this silent copy of the gene that's just sitting there waiting to be kind of woken up. And that's something that's not there for other genes. And this is really a unique system, a unique situation for Angelman syndrome. So we can leverage this and try to find ways to activate this dormant gene. And we can get the normal expression of the different isoforms of UB3A, the normal expression levels. It's just a matter of kind of turning this gene from an off position to an on position. And that's a tremendous advantage. And it's something that the ASO treatment and other strategies are really leveraging. And that makes Angelman syndrome a very tractable disorder to try to develop a therapeutic for.
You would think it would be so easy just to switch it on, right? I mean, but the complexity of just switching it on is not as easy as, switching a light switch. So it is super exciting. I know for us at the foundation, Liz and I are having conversations with new industry constantly, because this is a space that people are really excited about and they see a lot of potential in. So Ben, we're going to come back to you. So Mark Zylka, would you mind giving us a kind of an overview of what you are working on at UNC?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I think a lot of the family members are really excited about these ASO trials and where things are going to go with those. And I think everyone recognizes that these ASOs are relatively short-lasting, and so we're using a technology called CRISPR-Cas. It's a genome editor, and we're hoping to do essentially what the ASOs are doing, but to do it in a permanent way. And so instead of having to bring your child in every 3 months for an injection, you can bring them in once, inject, and then they're done. And this treatment we've tested in mice. It seems to work incredibly well. And the animals we've tested, we've pretty much cured multiple symptoms in the mouse models. So we're really excited about this approach. And it's essentially using this editor to put a little stop sign in the genome to turn on the UB3A gene, the paternal UB3A gene. And so we're continuing to work on this technology in the lab. And the other thing we're doing with Ben and a few other labs, this hasn't been published, but we're really kind of excited about it. And it does sound like crazy, but we're trying to make monkeys with Angelman syndrome. And you may ask, well, why the heck are we doing that? But we've heard from Liz and we've heard from parents, and I think many of you feel like your kids are guinea pigs. For those who are going into these clinical trials, as you saw from the genetics trial, the higher dose led to side effects in all the kids that were dosed. And so, we ultimately don't really know what's the right dose to use in a human or in our children. Whereas if we had a monkey, you could use the exact same treatment because the monkey genome is identical, more or less identical to the human genome. That would allow us to use the monkey as the guinea pig to test some of these new treatments, like the ones that we're developing and Ben's developing. And then the other thing that we often think about is how, like, say these ASO trials are phenomenally successful and your children show dramatic improvements. I would imagine nobody is going to want to take their children off the ASOs, because why would you do that? But Angelman is a disorder where you may actually be able to stop the treatment at some point. They may have a lifelong benefit from a short-term treatment. But no one's going to do that. If we had an Angelman monkey, we could actually look at that. We could take the treatments that are going into the humans, show that it works in the monkey, find out what happens when you remove the treatment, and see if the monkeys, remain, neurotypical. And so we really think we're really enthusiastic about this. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done. But we've teamed up with a group in California that has access to a lot of monkeys. We've been starting the engineering, and the initial studies look promising. We actually were able to get some funding from ASF to work on those. So it's it's going to take a while, but we are pushing that forward and really excited about it.
Yeah, I think all of this is quite fascinating to me. I'll go back to the first time I was able to come and tour the lab and see the Angelman mice and see all the people working. Ben and Mark, between both of your labs, how many people do you have working on Angelman? Because it's not just you two in a lab by yourself. So I'm curious, like, how many people do you have working on Angelman just at UNC?
Ben, you want to go first?
I'm thinking about 12 people in my lab are working on Angelman syndrome. But we and Mark probably has a similar number, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we have 10 people in the lab are working on it.
And then we have a lot of other labs at UNC who are working on Angelman syndrome as well, including some new ones that I think you'll hear from soon. So
yeah, I think that's what's so unbelievable about this team and why I wanted to bring everyone together. Like I would love to throw on a big building at UNC that it's like the Angelman Research Institute, because it is holistically, like, everything is happening for Angelman syndrome and in this location, which is really great, because not only do you have all the research, but then you have the clinical part to where you can take all of what you've done with research and move it into clinic. So I think that's so fascinating. So Mark, we're going to come back to you, but since you mentioned the excitement about clinical trials, Jamie, I want to go to you, and if you can just kind of help us understand. I think one of the questions we get a lot is, and I'm kind of switching gears from research to clinical trials, but families who are really interested. I mean, all families are super excited about what's happening with the ASOs. They want to get into a trial. They want to understand how this is working. What's your role, and what advice would you give to families if they're interested in participating in a trial?
Sure. So my role is to actually, so I'm principal investigator of our 2 clinical trials that we are part of at UNC. So we're partnering with Roche and Ionis. And my job really is to actually run the clinical trial and deliver the ASO. And so that's like a really powerful yet very humbling thing to be doing.
Right.
And these parents are literally placing their children's trust. And I have a fantastic team that makes these really complicated research visits happen. But I think that we provide a really great experience for families. And so then I follow them and make sure that everything runs smoothly, and we do follow-ups and things like that. And so we have, we're a little farther along on the Roche study than we are in Ionis, because Ionis is a little bit newer. But we're already in the process of, doing open label extension for Roche, and then we'll be partnering with them for their eventual phase 3 clinical trial. So we're really excited. We've developed really great relationships with them. We've heard really great feedback from families that have come and been part of our site. So although we know and we would love to give this treatment to every single family in North Carolina, as you guys are all aware, the spots are limited, and we are one of several sites in these clinical trials. And so we do have to limit who we can enroll in our clinical trials. But there are always, as you're hearing, new things coming down the pipeline, and these open label extensions, these next phases. So this is by no means the end. We're actually very much at the beginning. So if you are ever interested, you can reach out to any one of us, and we take everybody's names down, and we will contact you if that opportunity arises.
Yeah, I think I mean, I think it's a good opportunity for the people who are listening to know that if you are interested in being in trial, you can reach out to to any of our Angelman syndrome clinics and let them know. I'm going to go ahead and ask, I don't know if you can answer this or anyone on the team can answer this, but you mentioned open label in phase 3. Can someone just explain what that means for the team, for the group?
So when you are going to bring a therapeutic to eventually get use as far as getting approved by the FDA and being able to be commercially available, the FDA requires you to undergo several steps. A very important step is the preclinical work to make sure that everything is safe, make sure that the biology is mechanistically sound, making sure it's safe and tolerable in non-human primates and other models. And then, once it's ready, then it can go into humans. And so there are different phases. So currently the phases that we are in are the safety and tolerability. So these initial studies are actually not meant to, their primary aims are not meant to look at efficacy, although that is definitely something that the companies are interested in. But it's really making sure that these doses are safe. They're monitoring side effects, making sure that participants can handle the medication, they figure out doses and everything. And then the open label extension basically allows people that were in those phases to continue on the therapeutic for several years, with the goal of, if this were, ideally gets FDA approved, and so they could just kind of roll into commercial treatment. So it really doesn't, it allows them to continue. Phase 3 is sort of the more treatment phase, when they're really looking at treatment outcomes and measuring differences in like motor and seizures and language and all those things. And there are certain criteria that the FDA look at, and there are things that the companies need to figure out what is our primary endpoint. And that phase is what will eventually get you to commercial. So hopefully that makes sense. And yes, Hannah is our phenomenal coordinator who really manages all of our trials. Yeah, and you can contact her.
Yeah, that's awesome. For those of you that are watching through Facebook too, we'll make sure to send you this information as well. And before we move on, we have a lot of people who ask us questions about, can you tell us what positive things you're seeing in the kids who are participating? Can you explain why, unfortunately, we're just not allowed to, you're just not allowed to share that information at this time?
Right. So all of these, when we undergo these clinical trials, we do sign agreements that we aren't going to talk about data before it is publicly available. So as you can see, like Ultragenics, for example, has made some of their data publicly available. And so you can see what some of their outcomes are. And we are not allowed to talk about specifics, but I can say that, we're all very happy with the way things are going and excited to see what's coming next. And so hopefully at some point, we'll be able to speak a little bit more to that when our things are published.
I think that some of the industry will be able to give some updates in August at the Angelman conference. So if you aren't attending, make sure you sign up so you can hear all those awesome updates. But also what I always tell families is no news is kind of good news when it comes to trials. So if you're not hearing anything, it's probably a good thing right now. So anyway, Jamie, we'll come back to you. Thank you so much. I want to move to Mark Shen. Mark, thank you so much for being on. I think it's really, I wanted you to be on because I think it's really important for people to understand some of the research, other research that's happening at UNC that's really important to just the development of, the research of therapeutics of, what we're learning about Angelman syndrome. So do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing and how it's important to the Angelman landscape?
Yeah, I see our role doing clinical research with families as kind of the bridge between the work that Ben and Mark Zylka are doing using preclinical models to the work that Jamie's leading in clinical trials. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to learn as much as we can about the natural history of children with Angelman syndrome all the way through adulthood. And when we started this program of research, I think not that long ago, really 8 years ago, there really was not a systematic study of brain development longitudinally in Angelman syndrome. So we didn't know how the brain was developing over time or over age in this population, but we were accelerating towards potential therapeutics. So actually with funding through the Angelman Foundation, funded our first pilot study, which was we brought in about 20 families of kids with Angelman syndrome, and we started learning about why certain kids have microcephaly, for example, what the relationship is between the size of a chromosomal deletion and those brain differences. And what our goal really is to try and develop therapeutic targets, in other words, aspects of their brain development that may be amenable to treatment, and also objective, quantifiable outcome measures for these clinical trials. And one of the lessons that the field has learned in other neurological conditions is that choosing the right outcome measures is really important. We are looking for clinically significant measures that index therapeutic change. And some of our measures, at least in this field, were not sufficient because they were subjective or they were measuring things that weren't important to the families or important to the child. And so with MRI, for example, we can track the brain development very closely from infancy through adulthood. And that informs us both on sort of where to develop different therapeutics to improve brain function, and also what these therapeutics should be improving. And we feel like that with regard to brain function and also behavioral development is where we're going to make rapid improvements. And so one of the things that we feel very strongly about, and in part that why this team here works so well together, is that we have constant crosstalk with each other. So when we find some finding, an imaging finding in the brains of kids with Angelman syndrome, then we meet with Mark and Ben and we say okay, are you seeing this in your animal models? Or if not, is there a way that we can study this in animal models so that we can understand whether or not there's convergence between the models that we're developing? And then Jamie and I have a standing weekly meeting on Mondays where we say, okay, well, how can this inform the improvement of the design of clinical trials? And then we go to Margaret, who's leading our clinic here at UNC, and say okay, is there a way that we can develop relationships with the Angelman community to make sure that they have access to all this information and all these opportunities to participate in research and also clinical trials?
So someone just asked, how is this different than the actual natural history study? What's the similarity or what's the difference between what the natural history study is doing and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, good question. So the natural history study is I'll let Margaret, describe the full extent of the study, but it's a multi-site study that's looking at a lot of behaviors, very in-depth for very comprehensive behavioral phenotyping. One of the things that we've added to this effort is brain development. So looking at conducting MRIs, much of which is non-invasive MRIs without the use of sedation, to track brain development from hopefully 6-month-olds all the way through school-age kids. And then we're collecting hopefully EEG and sleep data from these kids. And then, a lot of the efforts the Angelman community is doing, which the foundation has really spearheaded, is collaborations. And so, we're partnering with Bladder and the Natural History Study to share that data. And really the goal, and Liz puts this very nicely, is to reduce burden on families so that families can come to UNC, for example, and it can be a one-stop shop to study the various different characteristics of their child. And they can participate in multiple studies, and we can all sort of share data so that we're not kind of redoing the same things for the same families, and that we can maximally make most beneficial use out of the precious data that the families are contributing.
Well, and I think an extra perk, if any family is wanting to participate in the study, is you get to go to UNC, and possibly maybe you could meet the rest of this amazing team that is on the camera right now, if you guys are able to attend. So is Mark, is that enrolling still? Are you looking for participants? I know we're looking to extend your funding, but what if someone's interested, what do they need to do?
Yeah, I'll drop my contact info already, but I will do the same for our study coordinator, Julia Gross. So we are enrolling right now babies with Angelman syndrome. This is a NIH-funded study that I'm collaborating with Ben Philpot on. And we also have an additional study funded by the National Institutes of Health that's led by Heather Hazlett that looks at older kids. So pretty much if you have a child with Angelman syndrome from the first year of life all the way through adulthood, we have an MRI study that we're conducting right now at UNC. And so I'll drop that into the chat, and then, all of the work that we're doing, we work with this team here. So for example, we have families who want to enroll in our MRI study. They travel here from across the country, but they've heard of our clinic and all the great work that Margaret and Liz and Anne have been doing for many years. And they want to see one of them, because they are, clinicians that are really specialized in Angelman syndrome. And so we provide that accommodation for them. And so we will provide them travel. We've covered their airfare and their rental cars and their hotels. And we try to make that visit as maximally beneficial for the family. And if they want to meet with a world-class speech pathologist or clinical psychologist, then they'll meet with Margaret Deramus or Ann Wheeler.
Right, they are world-class. I agree with that. I think that's one of the perks of this team, right? You said that so perfectly, that you can go in and be a part of research that's vital for our community, but also get the clinical care that you need. So it's a perfect transition. Yeah, Mark, if you don't mind putting that in there. And for those of you watching on Facebook, because a lot of you said that you're interested, we'll make sure to get that information to you as well. So Anne and Margaret and Liz, I'm gonna kind of tee this off, but your role Liz, your role is kind of all over the place when it comes to Angelman syndrome at UNC. You're kind of in research, clinical work, working with the foundation, but help people understand, what a clinic day looks like and why going to a clinic is important and what they would need to do if they're interested. I don't know who wants to answer that or who wants to start, but I'll just kick that out there.
I'm happy to talk about what the clinic day looks like.
Yeah, perfect.
And how that works. We have what we call the one-stop shop, and that's one of the reasons we were really set up for this when the clinic opened. Was it 11 years ago?
Wow. So
we have an interdisciplinary center, and we have interdisciplinary teams that were established, and we see a family, one family, or sometimes two, for the entire day. And we just rotate in and out different disciplines, sometimes, two at a time. A lot of times, Ann Wheeler and I will go in and do developmental assessments at the same time while somebody else is interviewing the parents. And so we're kind of rotating through, and everybody gets the time to talk to neurology, genetics, OT, PT, psychology, our psychiatrist if needed. I'm a speech language pathologist. We have social work on our team. We rotate through so that everybody has an opportunity to talk to the family and give recommendations. And then about after like sometimes it's 6 to 8 weeks, I try to send out a big report. Sometimes is up to 40 pages, but lots of recommendations, lots of next steps. Just provide like a product that can be taken home, and we consult with local providers. So a lot of our families, we've had families come from 5 different continents and at least over half of the states in the US. So not, I think about half of the families come from states surrounding North Carolina.
Sure.
But a lot of times they're from several hours away. So we're available to consult with local providers if they're not somebody who lives closely enough to come see like our neurologists on a regular basis. So it's a nice, you get people who know Angelman syndrome and who can, because a lot of families feel like, well, my speech language pathologist or my OT doesn't know anything. So we were able to give those specific recommendations and specific strategies that could be taken home and shared with a local provider.
Which is so important, because what we hear constantly is, I have a doctor or I have a PT, OT or whatever that has never worked with anyone with Angelman before. So being able to sit in front of someone who you don't have to explain Angelman to every single person that comes in front of you is, as a parent, is something that's incredibly refreshing. But the fact that you leave with a plan and that you guys are willing to work with the team at home, I think is really crucial, because as much as we would love to think that one clinic visit is going to be all we'll need in the lifespan of a child with Angelman syndrome, we all know as parents that that's just not the case, and that having someone that understands very simply what status means, and let's try a taper. Like when I said that to my neurologist here in Indianapolis for the first time, they looked at me like I was crazy. So having someone that understands that, I think it is so important. So that's what I love about the clinic. And so, and I want to move to you a little bit, because you are in the clinic, but I think it's also important if you can share a little bit, because you're kind of all over the place when it comes to what you're working on with Angelman syndrome, but I think that's fantastic. I know that ABOM and FAST are funding you to do some work with some of the natural history study data and some other stuff, but maybe give a little bit of a recap of what you're working on and why it's important to the Angelman community.
Sure. Yeah, I realized I didn't really.
I mean, ladder is the number one thing. I mean, we know that, but besides, just kidding.
Right. Yeah. So, one of the things that becomes a challenge when we're talking about clinical trials, and I think this has been mentioned by some of the other folks here on this panel, is really being able to determine what the best outcome measure is. And basically what that means is what is the best way that we can objectively determine whether or not the treatment works. And so what we've been trying to do at RTI and in collaboration with folks at Boston Children's Hospital and here at UNC is try to figure out ways we can take measures that we already are using and make them more applicable and more understand how a child with Angelman performs on those measures to begin with, and how we might think they could potentially perform in those measures with a treatment. And so we're doing lots of different things with those measures. Some of them have been thinking about what would be like the smallest change that parents would say would be enough to say, yes, this treatment works and it's worth it. And so, because if we can reach that threshold, then everything else beyond that would be icing on the cake, right? And so we want to try to determine what is meaningful to families, what is meaningful, what would you perceive to be the most meaningful things for your child with Angelman to see improve. And so we're also trying to identify, well, and if some of those things improve, how would that change your quality of life and the individual and your loved one with Angelman's quality of life? And so some of these things are going to be topics that we're going to be reaching out to families about in the near future. So when you hear from us asking about, can you tell us about your quality of life? Can you answer these questionnaires about what your quality of life is like, or what the quality of life is like for your loved one with Angelman? It's really important, because what we're trying to do is set the foundation for what it looks like now, so that when we ask you again after your kids have had some treatments, we can know, has that really changed for you? So that's one of the things we're doing. And similarly, if we call you up and ask you to let us know about what you think are the most important changes, please participate and let us know. All of that information is so critical.
Absolutely. I would just take a couple hours of sleep back in my life. That would be fantastic. So no, and I think it brings up a great point, because I think the more and more we get into, as we're into these trials and learning what's important to FDA when it comes to endpoints and biomarkers, this is going to be ever changing in some ways. And we're going to this knowledge from families and the participation in these panels or these conversations or focus groups are so crucial. So if you have the opportunity, if you're listening and you have the opportunity to be a part of that, please consider it, because it is crucial for the patient's voice to be heard. Everyone's responding, sleep, what is that? I agree. Okay, really quickly, I can't believe we're almost out of time, and I just could talk to you guys for hours. Liz, can you just little bit quickly explain the Ladder Learning Network and why that's important to the Angelman community?
Sure. Yeah, really good. So Ladder Learning Network is just the network of clinical sites across the country and across the globe. So this, for those who might be newer to the community, this network really started in 2010, 2011, when we first started funding, when the ASF first started funding clinical kind of centers of excellence across the country. And UNC was one of those first sites funded in 2011, along with Ron Thiebert's clinic up at Mass General Hospital. And we had a handful of clinics for several years. And then knowing that we weren't reaching all of the families with Angelman syndrome, and knowing how hard it is to travel with your loved one with Angelman syndrome, and knowing how important this specialized care is, we made a really strategic decision in 2019 to dramatically expand the network and launch this global Ladder Learning Network. And the goal of that network is really primarily to provide excellent clinical care, so that you can walk in, and just like everybody you've heard tonight, you can walk in and get one-stop shopping with people who know Angelman syndrome, right? You're not the expert in the room. Well, you're still the expert because you're the parent, but you're with a team of people who know Angelman syndrome in and out, and you can get your questions answered. And so that was always the first year of, why the network was formed, why we continue to expand the network, is to provide excellent clinical care. To that end, we have monthly clinician calls. So when a site joins the network, they may not have, 300 patients worth of Angelman experience, but they can lean on clinicians within the network who have been seeing patients with Angelman syndrome for 10, 15 years, who do have that clinical expertise, and they can run, those clinical questions by them to provide that kind of expertise of the few to many patients. And so we have monthly clinician calls where clinicians from across the globe get together and talk about challenging issues in Angelman syndrome and Duke 15. And really, again, this goal is to both make sure that everyone in the network is providing excellent care, but also to be able to elevate these clinical issues that are coming up in the clinic to the level of, identifying the next set of research questions. What do we need to be spending more time studying? Is it the GI issues? Is it, seizure control? Really identifying where those pain points are for the patient community, and then identifying those as research priorities. So the first goal is excellent clinical care. The second goal was really to establish a framework for clinical trials. So we knew these clinical trials were coming down the pipeline, and we knew that for them to be successful, we needed sites with infrastructure already built, with Angelman experts who knew how to run clinical trials, who knew how to think critically about clinical trial design, who could detect change in a clinical trial. So these were all really important things that we were focused on when building this Ladder Learning Network. And then obviously the other big component of the Ladder Learning Network is data collection through the Ladder database. And so all of our clinical sites should be collecting at least encouraging patients to, or individuals to sign up for the Ladder database, because it really, the goal, one of those main goals was to reduce this burden on families. Every time you go somewhere, somebody asks for the same 400 pieces of information about your child. The goal here was to fill it out one time, centralize it, make it accessible to all the doctors within the network, wherever you show up for clinical care, wherever you show up to participate in a clinical research study, wherever you show up to participate in the natural history study, that data is already accessible. And so you don't have to do it a million times over. But likewise, we're also building this really powerful repository of patient data that is what is needed to drive drug development. And so these were all the kind of critical components that went into the development of the Ladder Learning Network. Yeah,
it's a great overview, and it's such an important work, and we're so proud of what that looks like and how it's growing. And we have a lot of international sites coming on. We have a lot of domestic sites coming on. Just within the next 6 months, you'll probably hear a lot of announcements of all these amazing new clinics joining the network, because it's such an important thing. So I don't want to wrap up, but Ben, I'm going to put you on the spot because I think you've been in the space the longest, right? I think. So Ben, you and I were talking a while back. For those of you that are listening, we're celebrating 30 years of the Angelman Syndrome Foundation, which is just unbelievable, that this foundation has been around for 30 years. And it was started by some passionate families and a geneticist, Dr. Charlie Williams, who is still a part of our SAC and just an amazing human being. But I'm just curious, you've been in this space for half of that time, 15 something years. I guess just looking back on your work, what excites you right now, and what keeps you engaged with Angelman syndrome?
Yeah, I think what we're really seeing now is kind of the fruition of many hard years of basic science that are now paying off.
Yeah.
So really the hard work to understand the genetics of Angelman syndrome, including work from Stormy Chamberlain and other folks, and Art Baudet, work to understand the expression of UV3A, where it's localized, what it's doing, and now combining that with therapeutic approaches such as the ASOs, the gene therapies, the small molecules, other genetic strategies. It's really all kind of coming together now, and you see that in the fact that there are multiple clinical trials that are ongoing, and multiple more that aren't that far off from starting. So it's an exciting time. I know for parents that it can never come quickly enough. And a lot of parents have been waiting a very, very long time. But I think we're really at an exciting time, and we're starting to see impactful clinical trials being performed more in the pipelines. And it's neat to see how this could progress from hardly knowing anything 15 or 20 years ago to where we are now. Really, really big strides, and that the pace of science is only increasing just because technologies are getting better, our knowledge base is getting better, things are only moving faster and in a really positive way. So I always preach cautious optimism, and I'd continue to preach cautious optimism. I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic, and the future is pretty bright in Angelman syndrome, I think.
Well, I'm sure as a researcher, it's probably pretty gratifying to be where you were 15 years ago and now see where the space is. I can't even imagine what that is as a researcher, and how that feels to see where we are as a community.
No, it's very exciting to see, but at the same time, like I said, I know that parents are eager for something that's a real difference maker, and hopefully that will be there soon. We continue to work hard, and as good as it feels to see the science progress, what we really want to do is make sure that we make an impact on the individuals and the families.
Absolutely. Mark, Zylka, I'm going to ask you the same question, if you don't mind. I know that you've been an amazing supporter of the foundation. We've been proud to support your work. What, I guess, from your perspective, what are you most excited about as well? It's probably the same thing, but I wanted to ask you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to see what's going to happen with these ASO trials and the kids that are being treated, because that's going to really guide the work that we and many others
Yeah.
that are doing to make longer acting versions, permutations, things like that. So yeah, this is going to be really important. This is really the first neurodevelopmental disorder where a gene modifying treatment is going into humans. So it's not only going to be important for Angelman syndrome and families, but really for the entire community, autism spectrum community, neurodevelopmental community. And it's going to really guide these types of treatments for many other disorders. So I see lots of exciting things on the horizon.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think there are so many eyes on Angelman syndrome and everything that both all the foundations are working on, and what we've been doing or what we are doing. There, I know FAST and ASF are getting calls constantly of like, well, tell us what you're doing, or how did you do this? Because people are watching our field and they're just super excited about what that looks like. So anybody, I know we're a couple minutes over, but anybody else have any last thoughts on what you're excited about for the community? You have a lot of families who are listening right now, and obviously I love the word cautiously optimistic because I think that's really important. But anything else that you want to share with the community that you think would be important?
I just love that when I started this, with this clinic, over a decade ago, communication systems were few and far between. Most families didn't come in with anything. And the fact that I see so many families who actually already know what AAC is, and if they don't already have a system, we can start talking about that. And I think that that's really been a huge growth over the last 10 years. And I can imagine with, treatment and trials and things like that, communication is going to be growing, and we're going to see a lot of expansion. I think that's just really important. And
oh my gosh, I would love to hear Jackson tell me that his tummy hurts. That would be a win for me in so many ways. But I think it's important because you made the comment of people know what AAC is, and I think that as we reflect on the 30 years of ASF, I have to say it is in many venues as I possibly can. The families that have come before us, the families that have older individuals with Angelman syndrome who didn't have the supports that we have now, or the research or the resources, they've paved such a way for us, right? They raised money for this basic research. They raised dollars to help these things happen. And I think it's, this community has always been such an amazing community that comes together and does whatever they can to support. And I think it's always really important to lift up those families who have paved the way for families like me who have young kids. That AAC was something I knew before Jackson was even diagnosed, right? And so I think that it's so important, and I'm glad that you brought that up because I think it's so important to say. And there's actually some people who have been online tonight that have said, one family said, "Thank you so much for your dedication, all of your hard work. As a parent of a 27-year-old angel daughter, I'm thrilled to hear the progress," because I think 27 years they've been, hearing about this research, and now where we are, I'm sure that's very exciting for them to hear. So yeah. Any other last things? Ben, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I would just say it's really important that parents and families stay engaged, and that's really meaningful to us as researchers. And there are lots of different ways that parents and families can help. I know just the donations that they give to the Angelman Syndrome Foundation are obviously a huge help. That funding has really gotten these big studies off the ground, and it has also springboarded and led to big funding from NIH that has really made these big efforts go. There are also, if you're not in a position to donate, there are lots of other ways to support the research. And, for example, in being involved in clinical studies, such as the MRI study that Mark Shen is doing. And I would say just being an advocate for your child and for their life. So I know for my lab members, it's been really meaningful to meet individuals with Angelman syndrome, like to meet Liz's daughter, to go to the clinic, to work with Margaret and work with Anne and work with Mark, and see the individuals with Angelman syndrome at the clinic. And they bring that back to the lab, and it's more meaningful. They know what they're working for, they know what their goals are, and they know why they're doing it. And so there are lots of ways for families to be engaged, and the Angelman Syndrome Foundation is a great kind of venue and avenue for doing that.
I appreciate you bringing that up. I just was researching the other day. I was shocked to hear, I think what I saw the other day is that just the NIH alone has funded close to 200 million in Angelman research. Like, I was shocked to see that. I mean, the amount of dollars that have gone into Angelman research is unbelievable, but it's exciting because some of those grants from NIH were original pilot studies that were funded either by the Angelman Syndrome Foundation or FAST or another organization. And I think that shows the power of families and the power of these parents, that they're not gonna stop, right? We're gonna keep moving and keep working really, really hard until we can, get what we need for our kids. So I think that's unbelievable. So anything else?
I was just going to piggyback on what Ben said. And I mean, obviously people who are logging in are very engaged, and it's really what's driving the research. And also, we want to hear from families. I mean, the most inspiring part of our jobs is working with parents and working with individuals with Angelman syndrome. And it brings a lot of joy to our work. And we also learn from them. Like, for example, Liz and Jamie and I are starting a study of babies studying their feeding behaviors. And that was because moms told us that one of the first things that they noticed was a difference in the way that their baby fed and nursed compared to their other children. And so we listened to that, we incorporated, we designed studies around that. And that's the way that we're going to advance the knowledge base, is really by partnering with families and parents who they're the experts in this. And so, we want to hear from you. We're thrilled to, partner with families, and obviously the foundation has catapulted that. And a lot of the progress we've made is because families are really just driving all of this. And it's really, like Ben said, I mean, everyone, in our labs benefits from getting to know, the community, because it really puts an importance on the work that we do.
So what I'm hearing is anyone with an Angelman syndrome individual should come to UNC and bring that child or that adult and bring them into wherever you are so you can hang out with them. Because I agree, they're like the cutest and sweetest kids to hang out with, unless they're doing a Bailey or a Violet, let's be honest. But then it's a little different.
I think it's perfectly sweet then too.
Okay, good. Glad to hear that. So, well, first of all, Adela is going to kill me if I don't say anything. Ben, Adela keeps saying hi on Facebook. She sends her love from Argentina. She wanted me to make sure, but I just wanted to let you guys know, thank you. I know we went over time. I think that we could talk for hours. Thank you for everyone who's watching on Facebook. Thank you for those who tuned in through Zoom. This won't be the last time that we will talk with this amazing group. Keep in mind the ASF conference is coming up. A lot of them will be presenting their work, and they will be at the conference as well. So you don't want to miss that. It's a time to hear updates, but it's also a time to connect with families. So make sure you register for that. But each one of you, once again, thank you all for everything that you do. If Jackson was still up, I would bring him down and let him tell you thank you, but he's asleep, so we all know we're not waking him up. But thank you guys so much for your time tonight. We'll look forward to a part 2 with you all. You're amazing. Thank you for all you're doing for the community. We'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks for tuning in. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.